Welcome to my weekly live. Merhabalar, haftalık yayınıma hoş geldiniz. Bu hafta yayını İngilizce olarak gerçekleştireceğim ve bu hafta başka bir gün, muhtemelen Perşembe günü sadece Türkçe bir yayın yapacağım. Instagram'dan ve YouTube'dan duyururum hangi gün olacağını. Muhtemelen Perşembe. Evet. So, welcome to my weekly live. Today we'll be talking about democracy. I'm working on this subject lately. I was asked to write something. And while I was writing, I had this idea to share with you some of the conclusions I reached and some of the ideas that I had. So I'm gonna be sharing them with you. Hello Daniela, good to see you. I hope the weather is nice there where you are. In Istanbul we have this crazy, meaningless heat and humidity, and it makes it very hard generally to go on with daily life. It's not like it's super hot, but it's, just not a very nice weather. Anyhow, yeah. To my subject, I just learned today that there is a Panathinaikos Olympiakos game in Greece. So it means that many people are unable to watch the live. In Turkey, there is nothing to my knowledge tonight, but I don't know where else in the world, what else there is. But there is never a perfect time and there's never a perfect place to do anything, so here we go. Some days ago, maybe almost a week ago by now, Palantir published a manifesto. You might have heard of Palantir. Palantir is a company that excels in surveillance. Actually, what they do is they use the most advanced high-end technologies to figure out people's behavior and to divide them into patterns and to make it foreseeable. You might have heard that these people are technologically supporting the genocide in Gaza. They are also active in Lebanon, so they help the governments, the attacking governments, the aggressors, figure out where their targets might be living, what they might be doing, how they move, and they deliver this information to make it easier to kill. But they are not only in the war industry, they are in other industries as well. For instance, the whole health data of England has been sold to these people. Obviously, there is some benefits that the government of England claims that this company will bring to the health system of the UK, but most likely this data will be used in many other ways. But anyhow, what was interesting for me especially was that the timing of this manifesto, it was completely unasked for, you know. One day these people woke up and they were like, ah, yeah, we have to declare our principles and values right now. We have to tell people what we think and how we legitimize our actions. And what I found quite interesting in their manifesto was that, you know, it was nothing original, no interesting ideas. I think it was full of cliches and really, honestly, not very interesting to follow. But what I find very striking was how they claimed that they were there to defend free and democratic societies. And they were using arguments like free and democratic societies are weak, they need to be defended, and to be defended, they need to be supported with power. And we are the ones who are delivering this power. So this was quite, you know, this struck me a lot because in whatever angle you look at it, you know, from whatever perspective you see it, this company is quite harmful for democracy, you know. If we understand democracy as people's rule, they are surely not serving it. But they, in their own mind or in their own discourse, could position themselves as the supporters and the defenders of free and democratic societies, by which, of course, they meant white Western societies, and they claimed to be there for them. This made me think, because I think words have value. I think it is important what you say you want. It is important what you manifest. And if the most evil company that exists today, and I think this can objectively be said because the actions that these people are doing or supporting are, you know, however you define evil, whatever you claim it to be, they're actually pretty close to that definition. So they are claiming to act in the name of democracy and to defend democracy, while there are masses of people on the other side, around the world, who are also claiming to act for democracy, and they're using the word democracy to define what they want, to describe it, and to ask for it. And I think there is something very wrong in this equation because, you know, if people on one side of a conflict and the other side of a conflict are using the same words to define what they want, there is something that has just not been very well thought of. So I started thinking about it, and you know, it was not the first time I was witnessing the word democracy being used by people who clearly had self-interest in mind. I remember the 2003 invasion of Iraq and the discourse of bringing democracy to these people being used so vehemently, so insistently at the time. I also remember, and you will also remember, the war in Iran, the most recent one, how they tried to legitimize this attack by arguing that the Iranian government is not democratic, that it's tyrannical, that it's suppressing their people, it's oppressing its own people, and that it's killing its own people. And how in the beginning Trump actually tried to sell the argument that they would attack Iran if enough protesters were killed, or if any protesters were killed. And then many very credible reports came out that, and they themselves actually admitted that they had been supporting weapons to the protesters in the country to make sure that the numbers of the dead would rise, and they would have a legitimate ground on which to attack this sovereign country. So, you know, you don't have to be a very careful observer to even notice that the word democracy is being used for very bad and ugly objectives. But another thing that happened recently was I've talked about it before that the main opposition party in Turkey was taken over by the government. And this takeover was carried out in the name of democracy. What they argued was that the inner party elections had been sold and the government would be, the judiciary would be bringing it back, bringing the leadership back to its rightful owner because it had been taken away undemocratically by a compromise of the electoral processes within the party. And interestingly, this specific party has classically constantly been accused of not being democratic enough because it is the party that founded the Turkish Republic, and some of the actions that have been taken during the foundation of the Turkish Republic was considered to be not democratic enough. And over this argument, the whole demonization of this political party and its constituency was carried out. Yeah. So, given all of these reasons, I wanted to explore this subject, you know, from a historical perspective. There is not much to say, actually. Things are quite simple. For the ancients, democracy was not such a positive concept. Like when you read Aristotle, you notice that for him, democracy, democratic, these were derogatory terms. Like he did not consider these things to be nice things that we had to aspire for. For him, it was just a political system among many others. And he did not like it particularly. It was only during the European age of revolutions that democracy became an idea, an ideal that was aspired for. And I'm gonna be talking about it in a bit, but now it's time for a song. Oh, hi Foti, welcome. Hi Maitaro, good to see you. So, what is the mistake that we do? You know, sometimes the mistakes are not ours. Sometimes we just go after goals that are not reachable. We have objectives that just are logically impossible. You know, they are unreal, or irrational. And the mere fact of us believing in them is problematic. But it's not always clear, you know. And sometimes some promises are made just to keep people hooked on something. In such a case, it is very possible that the one who is believing in a promise, who has been convinced that a promise given to him is there to be delivered, will keep waiting for it as long as possible. And this is a song about that. μακριά σου. Μα η νύχτα αυτή μου φέρε το άρωμα σου. Τι λάθος κάνω κι όλο φτάνω πιο κοντά κι όλο σε χάνω κι όλα απ' την αρχή ξανά κι όλο σε χάνω κι όλα απ' την αρχή ξανά. Τι λάθος κάνω, φτάνω είναι αργά. Μια ξενιτιά, η ζωή χωρίς εσένα κι απ' την καρδιά δεν γλιτώνεις με ένα ψέμα. Τι λάθος κάνω κι όλο φτάνω πιο κοντά κι όλο σε χάνω κι όλα απ' την αρχή ξανά κι όλο σε χάνω κι όλα απ' την αρχή ξανά. Τι λάθος κάνω, κι όταν φτάνω είναι αργά. By Yanis Haroulis, Τι λάθος κάνω. It became extremely hot in this room. One second, I need to open the window. And change the rhythm. I see that the vision once again is getting cut, guys. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm not getting good internet these days. Like today I was supposed to have good internet, but you know, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. What to do sometimes? Yes. So yeah, overall, to sum up what I was trying to explain before the song, we live in this situation where democraticness, being democratic, democracy, has become a sign of superiority. Like it's a signifier of something for sure. Democracy, by the way, I was saying that for Aristotle, for the ancients actually, democracy was not the name of the most desirable political system. It was just one of the many systems that were available and that could be used. The word democracy took over a very positive meaning in the modern age of revolutions in Europe. You might have heard of course you will have heard of the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution. The gist of the story there is that in the French Revolution, the bourgeoisie becomes so powerful because basically the European bourgeoisie at that time is exploiting the whole world and bringing in the capital. You know, they are collecting capital, collecting money. They are making money over all of the planet and bringing that money back home. They are investing it and they are lending it to the governments. So the French king at this time, before the French Revolution, the king himself has become a borrower. He is a debtor of the bourgeoisie. He is constantly spending money. The kingdom needs a lot of money, but he's not able to make that money. So he has to borrow it constantly from the people who are making that money. He is the one who gives all of the decisions. He is the one who has the right to kill and to punish. And the people who make this money and who give him this money, you know, they're doing all the work. They're bringing home the money that is needed for the state. But they have no decision-making power. So this creates a situation where the revolutionaries are extremely powerful, they're extremely strong, and the king is very weak and feeble vis-à-vis them. This creates the special situation of the bourgeois revolution as it happens in France and becomes explosive, expanding to the regions around it. And during this time, because the bourgeoisie do their revolution with such power and such fervor, and they believe so much in themselves, you know, they are the realization of the human mind. They are the different individuals coming together, all of them pure, because none of them have the decision-making power. They have not tried it yet. They're starting to try it now. But until that point, until the revolution, because they never had to make any critical governmental decisions, they had the idea that they were purely innocent, and not just innocent, that by bringing their minds together, they would be able to always find the right solutions and to get to the right decisions. Because the human mind, in its collectivity, could only reach the right solution. It could only reach the correct result, right? Because human minds all together were just very powerful. And they could do amazing things, as they were already doing, colonizing the whole world. So at the time, they came up with this idea of people's rule, and the word from ancient Greece, democracy, demokratia, seemed to be a perfect fit because it sounds, feels, and literally translates into people's rule. Demokratia, the rule of the people. So, in that simplicity, this word became a cliche, it became the signifier of the good government, of the government as it was desired, of the kind of government that could be desired. You know, anything good, anything nice, anything beautiful was put under the rubric of democracy. This is how signifiers work, you know. Sometimes when things are very clearly defined, they will not be very strong. When a word has a very clear definition, it won't have the charm that it has when it has a very vague definition. And this was it with democracy. Europeans at the time did not have much of an idea, or they did not care to know, that what they thought was the rule of the people was actually the rule of a very small number of people. Today we know that Athenian democracy, ancient democracy, was a political system where about 10% of the population actually accessed political processes and they had political participation. 90% of the population were not represented in politics. They were just not part of political life. because they were not considered to be citizens. First of all, women, they were kept out of public life, they were kept out of political life. In public life, they existed somewhat. They existed as courtesans. Of course, they existed as mothers and wives and daughters. But their role was recreational and reproductive. So they were there for the entertainment and well-being of the citizens, all of whom were men. But being a man was not enough to be participating in politics. You also had to be free. Because in ancient times, slavery existed, and it was actually the slaves that did most of the undesirable, time-consuming labor. Free people also worked, but they had a life outside of work, whereas slaves were reduced to labor. So they had to work in the fields, or they had to, work in the mines. Whatever was being done, whatever job, whatever labor had to be carried out, it would be carried out primarily by the slaves, because the economy had to keep going, the economy had to keep running. I don't have numbers as to how many slaves there were compared to how many citizens there were, but we can guess that the number of slaves probably were higher than the number of free men, because they were needed. There was a lot of work to do. So if you're a woman, you cannot participate in democracy in its ancient version. If you're a slave, you cannot participate in democracy because you're not a citizen. But even if you're free, even if you're a free man, you still had to be a citizen to be able to participate. Like if you were a foreigner, if you were foreign born, if you were from a neighboring region, let's say, you still could not participate in the processes of democracy because it was not for you, it was for citizens. So overall, when you look at this picture altogether, you notice that the word for a desirable political system, the word for the good political system as we have it today, was actually the rule of local men, where they kept 90% of the population under their control, and 10%, they just did whatever they want, and they were, happily leading their own lives. And yes, among the 10%, they could be represented, they could be elected to offices, but also elections were not very important in ancient democracy. Elections were not per se considered democratic. And actually, there were occasions where people would be selected to the public office through lottery. Their names would be written on papers or tablets, whatever. I'm not sure if there were papers at the time. And they would be picked. Because in fact, they knew this very well. They knew that whoever wants political power is probably not fit for political power. So they wanted to make sure that whoever was keen to become a leader would be kept out, and normal, ordinary people could be brought to power, because ordinary people could be better trusted with power. You might have seen too, right? I've seen it many times, like people who go after political power will probably abuse it, because if you're not going to abuse it, then why? Political power is a lot of responsibility, and it doesn't bring much, so why would you want it? Anyhow, this was the situation with the ancients. Europeans in the 18th century, in the 19th century may not have known that. But the word stuck with us. The word has not changed since then. Like we still, when we want to voice our complaints about something not working. We say that there's not enough democracy, or that the democracy has deficits, that it's not functioning properly. So democracy still sits there for us, up there, high, very high, as an ideal, as something that we need to attain, something that one day will be achieved or has to be achieved, or we have to be working in that direction. That's And as I said, I find it especially strange that even though we have seen it not work so many times, like we have seen it over and over again failing, we still cling to this word. That I find quite interesting. It's like a lover that never appears, someone who promises you that they will be there, but they just don't come, they never appear. You keep on waiting, they don't come. But such are promises. A promise is something that you cannot give up. Like, you cannot give up a promise when it fails to deliver. You cannot say, I was promised this, but it didn't happen, so I should give up. You never say this. Instead, you will say, I was promised this, but it has not yet happened, but I am still promised this. This promise that I've been given is still there. It has not been rejected. It has not been cancelled. So maybe I should wait a little longer. Maybe I should just do things differently. Maybe I am the reason why this is not happening. Maybe I am the reason why I have not attained democracy yet. Maybe we have not attained democracy yet because we are not developed enough. This argument is used very often. There's this idea that people have to be developed enough politically or socially for democracy to be able to work. This was an argument that was used quite often during the 1970s, 1960s and the 1970s, when a series of CIA-backed coups were carried out in peripheral countries such as Latin American countries or Turkey or Greece. And in all of these military coups, the argument was that society had developed too quickly for its infrastructure. Political desires, political demands had expanded too quickly for the socio-economic structure to be able to handle and to cater to these demands. So what these military coups were expected to do was to slow down the political development for a little while, such that economic development could catch up. Because democracy is not for everyone. It is only for those who are fit for it, who have the capacity for it, right? The song that I'm playing now is about this kind of situation, where someone has promised that they will come this spring, but they don't appear. And the person cannot stop waiting for them. The most that they can do is to sing a song about it, Because when someone doesn't show up, when a promise is not kept, you cannot let go of it that easily, especially if they keep promising you the same promise that was not delivered. Biz bu sonbaharda buluşacaktık. Bahar geldi geçti, sen gelmez oldun. Biz bu sonbaharda buluşacaktık. Bahar geldi geçti, sen gelmez oldun. Taşlara mı döndü kalbin, gelmedin. Aylar yıllar oldu, sen gelmez oldun. Sen gelmez oldun, sen gelmez oldun, sen gelmez oldun. Gözlerim yolda beklerim ama sen gelmez oldun. Deyiptin baharda buluşacaktık. Bahar geldi geçti, sen gelmez oldun. Demiştin baharda gelirim diye. Bahar geldi geçti, sen gelmez oldun. Taşlara mı döndü kalbin, gelmedin. Kuşlar kondu göçtü, sen gelmez oldun. Sen gelmez oldun, sen gelmez oldun, sen gelmez oldun. Yarim, gözlerim yolda beklerim ama sen gelmez oldun. Yes, this is Sen Gelmez Oldun, an Azeri song. About an unkept promise, something not delivering, not arriving in time. I don't know how you are with unkept promises, but I'm actually very easy to deceive with them. Like, it's very hard. I personally find it very hard to accept that something that has been promised is not coming along, even though, theoretically I know that things don't work in the way they are promised, and a lot of times people just give promises to deceive and to get their way. But still, when you want to believe something, you believe it. So with democracy, people knew all along that it was not working. In the 19th century, they knew that it was not working, but they considered this to be a problem of the definition of the people. So they tried to expand this definition. And in fact, in 19th century, in democratic countries, democracy was not considered as something, citizenship was not considered to practically, truly extend to all of the population. So people had things to actually do over the definition of democracy. They sat down and tried to make the definition expand, so that it would include workers, so that it would include poor people, so that people who did not have money could vote and they could run for office. And then there were the suffragettes, the women who worked for women's suffrage, because it seemed wrong to a lot of people that women were not considered citizens, that they could not vote. And therefore, instead of thinking whether this was a system that could actually work, people sat down to fix the parts of the system which they thought were faulty. And the main such fault was the definition. So the great struggle around democracy that went on in the 19th century and in the early 20th century was about the definition of who is part of the people, and who has the right to vote, and who has the right to run for office. And globally, another process was at stake. It was modernization. And because democracy was meant to be the people's rule, many individuals around the world sat down to modernize their own nations and to work on their own people so that they could rule these people, so that the people would have a face and they would be this face. So elites all around the world started to work to build democracies in their own countries. But no matter how they took it, no matter how it worked, no matter how much it expanded, democracy has actually never in practice functioned as a universal signifier. It expanded to take over the meaning of all of the people, from a political system where only rich local men were represented, or local men with a standing, local men who owned slaves and who were not slaves. The definition of democracy, its expanse, grew to include women, workers, even migrants to some extent. You can become a citizen today in many parts of the world, and you can vote. There are different ways to become a citizen. You can buy citizenship, or you can spend some years in a country, which again needs material resources, like you have to have money or you have to work. And after that, you can become a citizen. So it works somehow, But still, we are not satisfied by it. Like, it does not work in the ways that it was promised that it would work. On the contrary, it is being taken up as a word in different parts of the globe by people who want to get their way, or by people who want to accuse others of not being this or that. And by the very definition of things, some people seem more democratic just because of what they are. So it feels like Americans are by definition more democratic than any other nation in the world. I don't know how this comes along, but this seems to be a general idea, a general acceptance, an assumption, you know. Americans are by definition more democratic, or the French, they're more democratic. Why? Because they have made the revolution somehow, somewhere. Like, how can we so easily forget, for instance, that the whole situation in Algeria was a fault of democracy? Like, how can we forget that in France as well, which is supposed to be a democratic country, parts of the population were excluded and they keep being excluded today? Or how can we forget, for instance, that of all of the nations who revolted for popular rule, who rebelled against imperial domination, it was Haiti that was punished the most severely. Haiti made their own revolution shortly after the actual French Revolution because they were a French colony, and they were very open to receive all of these modern ideas of equality, freedom, whatnot. It was a slave society, it was a slave economy. But the slaves they had received some education, you know, they didn't spend all of their time working, obviously. They had somehow the opportunity to expose themselves to new ideas, and they were like, yeah, now that these people are talking about democracy, now that democracy, or the rule of the people, égalité, liberté, fraternité, freedom, equality, and brotherhood, has become such a valid idea, since everyone is saying that all humans must be equal and nobody must serve one another and nobody must be slaves, it is time for us to revolt as well, said the Haitians. And they did revolt, they made their own revolution, they successfully rebelled, and they brought down the government of white plantation owners, of slaveholders. But what happened in Haiti does not resemble what happened in other places, such as France or Greece, for instance. Like, Greece is not a great example. Like, it's not a very positive example, let's say. It's not like they had a great democratic time after their own revolution. But Haitians at the time saw themselves and Greeks standing in the same place as having revolted against empires. They, of course, also saw the French society to be in the same level as themselves, having revolted against an empire, having brought down a king. But Haitians never recovered from their own revolution, and they actually, for many years, until recently, had to pay reparations to the slaveholders whose property was taken away by the revolution. They were made to pay reparations to people and states who were already rich. And these reparations were sanctioned by the international law. So if Haiti decided to refuse to pay these reparations, they would be isolated and they would not be getting even whatever the small benefit it is that they're getting from the international system. So the ideas of democracy and popular rule did not extend to include the first black revolution. They somehow extended to include the whites. For instance, Greece, even though after its revolution it did not really function as a democracy, and there are different reasons for it which I will not get into today, they are still, to this day, seen as the cradle of democracy. And this leads to some interesting discussions. Like, I was always surprised living in Greece that people actually, they would very easily say things like, it's strange that people, or like that the political systems runs in such tyrannical ways, and this is the place where democracy was invented. How can we be in this situation right now? So in the national imagination there is a direct continuity with the ancient history, and they see themselves as the inventors of democracy. And this also seems to bring to them moral superiority. Oftentimes, when I write about Turkish politics or when I comment about Turkish politics somehow on social media, let's say about a party takeover or about something in history that has happened, and I use the word democracy for whatever reason. Also, the word republic does not exist in Greek. So when I want to say republic, I use the word democracy, and I use whatever other word that is available. And I will often hear people saying, Greek people, coming and saying under the post, you cannot talk about democracy because you are Turkish, or like Turkey cannot have democracy because it is Turkish. Just like democracy is a Greek thing. It's like yogurt or baklava. It is something that they can claim ownership beyond yogurt or baklava, actually. And something that just because of their identity they can claim to have, and they can claim to exclude others from. Like they can argue that this or that nation cannot be democratic, or they cannot be included in any kind of democracy or in the definition of democracy because of their identity, because of what they are. This sounds so strange and interesting to me, but actually not so much. Like, coming back to the manifesto of Palantir, which I referred to at the beginning of the show, I think it's not surprising at all that some nations and some races even claim ownership of what we call democracy, because democracy as a concept was repopularized at a time, yes, when the European bourgeoisie was rebelling against their own kings, but they were rebelling against their own kings, building on the wealth and riches that they had accumulated on the backs of the whole planet. So I think the modern concept of democracy was never meant to function universally. It was never meant to include the whole of humanity. We just like to believe that it is so because we couldn't find any better words for it. There was no other moral authority strong enough to introduce another word and to make it the big signifier of a good political system. And therefore we are still using this word to define a good political system, something that is very nice to have, but something we just cannot have because, it's not working. I think we should find a new word. The word democracy does not cater to our needs, but then again, coming up with a new word is not going to be that easy. So we will wait and we will see. And I will be coming back to this subject in the future shows. It's almost been an hour, and it's time for my last song. πρακτορείο, θολό και κρύο. Κάποιοι μιλάνε για παράξενες βροχές και το ταξίδι σαν άγριο φίδι γεμίζει φόβο τις αδύνατες ψυχές. Απόψε μοιάζουμε κι οι δύο, πιο πίσω εγώ και εσύ μπροστά, σαν βραδινό λεωφορείο που έχει τα φώτα του σβηστά. Για μας ο κόσμος δεν τελειώνει, για μας ο κόσμος αρχινά, για να γίνουμε πάλι ανθρώποι, δεν θα μας βγάλει πουθενά. Το πρακτορείο, θολό και κρύο. Κάποιοι μιλάνε για παράξενες βροχές και το ταξίδι σαν άγριο φίδι γεμίζει φόβο τις αδύνατες ψυχές. Άντρα και γείτονα και φίλε, δεν νίκες προσφυγιά, μια παγωμένη σπίθα στείλε, να σου την κάνω πυρκαγιά, κι αν δεν καείς έλα κατόπι, που δεν θα μένει πια κανείς, για να γίνουμε πάλι ανθρώποι, στο κήπο της Γεστημανής. Το πρακτορείο, θολό και κρύο. Κάποιοι μιλάνε για παράξενες βροχές και το ταξίδι σαν άγριο φίδι γεμίζει φόβο τις αδύνατες ψυχές. Yes. So this is it for today. I hope to see you again next week. And this Thursday I will be live in Parma, Beyoğlu. If you're in Istanbul, please come by. It'll be fun. Take care. Have a nice week and a nice evening. Bye.